morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Come on.
Woo! I love the energy. We are going to thrive off of that. We are so excited you're here. My name is Shreya Singh Hernandez. I use she, her pronouns. I am an Indian woman. I have medium skin tones, I guess. I have dark hair. I'm wearing a block print white and black dress and cowboy boots that I'm very fond of. I'm really excited. I'm in a mid-sized body if you want. I'm really excited to welcome you here today for On the Margins, Building for the Future of Digital Products. I'm really excited for this panel. To give you a brief overview, this panel is formed to address the ethics of technology and design that have been discussed for years. Products can still create harm and negatively impact marginalized and underinvested communities. There's an increasing importance placed on product equity and how to build inclusive products for historically marginalized people, including those of color, LGBTQ plus communities, disabled communities, among many more. How can we build equitable products while still questioning the ethics of products? This features these wonderful leaders from organizations addressing product equity at scale, and each with their own perspectives on the ways forward. We're going to be discussing what is working for building inclusive products, equitable products, what are the considerations in creating products for marginalized and underinvested communities, and what does the future hold for product equity. But you know this because this was in the description and for the reason why you signed up for this panel. So I'm very excited to kick it off. On the stage here with me today, I have Zach Singleton, who is at Uber and is the Director of Product Management, Product Equity, Safety, and Privacy. We have Timothy Bard-Levins at Adobe, who is the Director of Product Equity. And we have Shadiqa D. Miller, who is Inclusive Design and Product at Visa. Okay, well, we're gonna kick off the conversation today talking about how product equity is a distinct discipline. In my one-on-ones with all of the panelists here today, we got to dig into how they got started on product equity and how it is actually developing into a distinct discipline in tech. Each of the folks on the stage today have formed those teams at their companies and have created the title of product. So I'd love to get off. If you would give your visual descriptors, your pronouns, and also let us know how do you define product equity in your work and how have you built a career around product equity and why? 3 questions, really.
I'm Zach Singleton. I'm a black male. I'm wearing black pants, a camo shirt. I have black hair, brown eyes, a more slim to medium figure. And then how I think about this work and how I got into it. So the way we think about it at Uber, I always like to use more simple terms, is building products that work for everyone at a high level. And one of the things you touched on, Shreya, this is about building products for all the people in this room. There's either someone or you yourself that we're talking about building for. To keep it that simple, we're talking about building for women, someone who may have a disability, someone from the LGBTQ plus community, someone who may be black, someone who may be of Asian descent, and so on and so forth. So I always like to say, don't overcomplicate it in that sense. And then when I talk about functionally or from a practice perspective, how we do it, we think about systems change. So that is all the systems processes we have in place that inform product equity and how we build. We think about equity evaluations. So that means from the ground up, when we're thinking up a product, how we build it, what kind of things we look out for or problems that it can cause for certain communities. That's another domain we have. And then product launches, which is what every team in our company does at Uber. And then how did I get into it? I think one, I always like building things as a kid, like a lot of people that are in tech, it's kind of sort of innate and into me. So that was the starter. And then, but as I embarked on my journey, I was someone who was high performer in school, good student. But I encountered things that I would just say are weird and odd, along the way that I was like, if I'm encountering this and there are these roadblocks for me to show up in these spaces and ensure that we're building the future with all the faces, that represent this planet together. If I'm encountering that, then I know other people are going to encounter it like 10, 15 fold. And so any space that I'm in, I can't help but work toward make it more equitable, make it more inclusive. There's any space in my life where I don't feel right. Like I don't feel okay. Like I feel like I'm only being half myself. So it's a part of how I identify. It's both building and also creating space for others. That's just who I am as a person. So.
Hey, y'all. Timothy Bartle-Evans, of Product Equity again. So I am a Black man with a luscious beard that is my natural color. Yes, everyone's nodding. Great. Bald with an amazing shirt that I bought from when I was there. And, just I'm all fashionable and such. Then I realized I was walking down, I was like, I'm dressed like New York in Texas. Lord help me. So product equity. So one of the first things we did when we formed our team was define it. And so we define it as a state in which every person, regardless of human difference, can access and harness the power of digital products without harm, bias, or limitation. And this is both how we define it as well as my team's vision for how we think about the future of digital products. I take that and connect to how did I get into this? It's very much the same as Zach in the sense that I'll kind of give a quick anecdote, which is I was talking to my executive coach and she was saying, Tim, you don't realize that the thing you do is you think about experiences, but you actually think about them through the lens of you navigated this space and you want to be able to improve it for others who also have navigated this space or are going to navigate it. And so I take that life experience and connect it to 2020 when everyone woke up to racism because apparently it didn't exist before then. Got some giggles. And a lot of that really, it drove, as we saw in the country and in these industries, a push towards equitable products and racial justice. And what I did was I did my best to take something that felt very intangible and make it tangible, and then show how it can be produced or shown through products, especially digital products. And from that lens, I've built the past few years off of just making it more real, because that's my mission, is to say it's a tangible, clear thing that we all can do, that we can address, that everyone has an opportunity to lean into. And the last thing I'll say is, like, if you ever, talking about simplifying, if you ever want to question something like, hey, what does this mean for me? I see a lot of people in here wearing glasses. I'm wearing contacts. That means you're disabled. And most people don't really get that. Is like, just because you have something attached to your face that helps you see better, you are technically disabled, even though you don't think about it in the same sense. And so how would your experiences be very different if someone even took that small consideration to think about things that you navigate on a daily basis as someone who is seeing impaired? I'm good.
You good?
I'm
You good?
I'm good.
Okay. Just making sure. So, Dee Miller, Visa Director of Inclusive Designing and Product Equity. I am wearing black pants, black woman with locks, purple locks.
Yes.
And then, or highlighted with purple. Black pants, a shirt that talks about self-care, because in this space, this is important, right? With the white blazer. So how do I define product? I think both of my wonderful colleagues here have just described it to a T. I think what I would add from a Visa perspective and from a financial services perspective is about making sure everyone is able to financially thrive in various areas. So that's how they spend, how they save, how they borrow, how they plan. They're thriving. So it's really about taking a little step further about financial health. What is that financial health? Because there's people that are financially vulnerable. There's people that are financially coping, but we want you to be financially healthy. And so that's how we look at it. It's like, how do we, and what's interesting about Visa is we're B2B, B2C. So we have other layers and how we have to consider, because we're not straight to consumer. And so when inclusivity comes to us, it's like, how are we looking at our fintechs that are not like the regular large banks? That's what that is for us. How are our small businesses able to participate with the other medium and large markets and things of that nature? So we start looking at it from a business sense, but we also have to do the research and understand the end user, because we do have the rise of conscious consumers, and that is who we're ultimately serving. So that is what product equity means to me. How did I get in this space? I'm a lefty. That's it. My life seriously was always challenging. It was like, this does not work for me. And I'm a lefty born to two right-handed people. It's just, my life was, that's what it is. And so that really, but then the second thing was my grandmother. My grandmother had diabetes, and she was using a blood glucose monitor, and she didn't understand what the monitor was showing her. And so from that, I went into this space and started like saying, okay, I really want to help people navigate this world and make this world a better place and inclusive.
Yeah, amazing. And I'm honored to be on the stage here with you. Again, my name is Shreya Singh Hernandez. I am here from the team at the Aspen Institute on a program called Aspen Digital. We have launched the Tech Accountability Coalition, which brings together companies, large tech companies, like the ones on stage and many others, to align on things like how to measure product equity, how to build in processes to ensure outcomes beyond just one company, but across the tech sector as a whole. So I'm really excited to be the moderator for today's panel. I would love to dig into your role, what it looks like functionally at your company, and how do you insert conversations, process points about equity?
How do I say this? It's really tough. It can be very tough. And I say that from an executive level, knowing that some people who are doing this work, some of them aren't even managers. And so I always say like it's super tough. And it's really tough, especially because the unique thing about my team is that it was created when I was hired. And so we've had to go through justifying our existence in the sense of like how and why people should work with us. But it's also a double-edged sword, because there's this challenge of we create our own expectations. We create sort of what our goals are. And at the same time, we have to then communicate how impactful they are. And it's really tough to do that, because you're trying to tell people who don't understand your work that the thing you just did or the thing you just helped their teams with actually has a ton of impact. And so like navigating and having influence is really tough. I've found a lot of success, especially in the short term, with one, finding things that are brand new, moving quickly that we can jump on. And so I've talked a lot about like building at the speed of trust, which is something that my team sort of really coined and I've sort of taken on, is like we're moving at the speed of trust. And so we can build trust with our partners, then we can, be sometimes even allowed to do a small thing, and that small thing is a quick win to get us to do a bigger win. And something that Maria Yap, who is the VP of Photoshop at Adobe, she said to me during a 101, and I really appreciated it, was like, hey, if you come to me and like use the metaphor of a house, if you come to me and we are changing the roof and you say, hey, have you thought about getting new insulation? Then I'm probably not going to want to listen. Like I'm not going to want to talk right about that. But if you come to me when we're pulling the siding off the house and you say, have you thought about insulation? Then that might be a good time for us to have a conversation, because, we're already going to do this anyway. And so part of the work that I've had to do with my team is understand what are the priorities of other organizations and other leaders, and then how they might align with what we're trying to accomplish. And then from there, then sort of like figure out ways to build relationships, to insert ourselves and sort of kind of latch on like little ticks, and then over time you'll see the benefit of this tick. So it's not a tick. What do you call the thing that hangs on a sharks? Remoras, something like that. Anyway, bad metaphors. Let's move on.
That's not the metaphor that you. So at Visa, within the design organization, we had a product equity working group. And so we started there. And so the reason we did that is because we then have squads. And so they're able to infiltrate each of the product teams. again, though, Visa is so big and so vast, what I started to do was similar to what you did, was like, okay, what are the priorities and what teams are being built? So then we had an inclusive client partnership team. I attached myself to that. Like, okay, now we have government solutions. I'm over there too, because I know that's an area. We have small businesses. This is where. So we started, and one of the things that our previous CEO, who's just retired, Al Kelly, said he wanted it to be a part of our DNA. And so he actually built out an entire team that was called the Results That Matter. And we looked at every single part. So in marketing, there's a review team in marketing that's reviewing all of our things. And each team came together that way, because he was like, in all honesty, and talking to him when he came and visit in June of last year, it was like, you want to eliminate my role. And I know that sounds weird, but that's ultimately what you want, because you want it to be a part of the business strategy. And so that is how we've tried to start doing it more. But we started off with the design org.
Just because, some of you may have come to this talk because you want to understand how you might do this in your own companies, maybe your leaders, or maybe you need to do it from the ground up. So I had the, opportunity to build our product equity team at Uber from zero. I've been in the company 7.5 years now. So one of the things I tell you that's important is understanding your company culture and how it recognizes impact from the top down. And this is not, by the way, that goes not just for building like a product equity team, but if you're going to build any new team inside your company, you need to understand that. One of the other things that I had been good at, because before I built out our product equity team, I was already running our privacy product team, was doing more with less. So I think anytime you can deliver results without needing many resources, what happens is the company is like, oh, we need more of that, right? Or leaders want to be associated more with that thing. So those things were important for me to think about. The other thing that I say is key is, in any company, I think we might know in our own companies, there are certain leaders that have more influence than others, and they hold a lot of weight with what they say, with what they back up and put their support behind. And so what I decided is, I'm going to build the product equity team under the most influential, but also leaders, but also the ones that have the highest bar in the whole company. Meaning, like, it's going to be really, really difficult to get to yes, and to get to more support, to get to more headcount. But when we do, if and when we do, no one else is going to say no, and everybody else will get out of the way. So that's what I decided to do. So long story short, we have a product team on the product equity side, which I lead, 2 PMs in addition to myself. We have a design team that has a handful of folks dedicated to product equity. We all roll up on the product and design side to our chief product officer. And then we have a engineering team actually dedicated to product equity as well. And at Uber, we're unique in that we don't have a CTO today. We've got 3, kind of like a triumvirate of folks that together make up the CTO. Our Eng team is in one of their orgs. But like I said, these folks are the most influential people in the company. So any aftermath of what happened with George Floyd is, of course, when this started to really come together for us. And that's when all leaders wanted to show up, they wanted to look good. And it was like, Zach, how can we go about doing something? And I said, I'll be involved if we're going to do something that stands the test of time. It will not be short term. It's not going to be for show. I'm not here for spots. I don't care for pictures or being in a video or anything like that. I like to build products that are going to be used for a long time. And I like to build systems that drive change and have impact. And they're like, okay, then do you have a plan? What's next? I'm like, actually, I do. And we're going to meet every month, right? If not bi-weekly. And it was those same leaders I'm talking about that have all that influence. They were there every time, and they were hard on us. But once we understood how to drive toward what they consider impact, what they consider success, we've been in a good place since then. So this is how we built it at Uber.
I loved what you said about meeting the standard of excellence, and D, about the cross-functionality and the connective tissue that you have to create across a matrix organization. And Timothy, the next section is about moving at the speed of trust. I'd love to ask, how do you balance limited resources, growing backlash that we're experiencing against DEI work, tight timelines to ship, and advocating for internal additional process points around product equity? How do you move at the speed of trust?
It's hard. Again, I'm gonna say that a lot, apparently, because a lot of it really boils down to trade-offs, right? So I'll say this. Last year, my team really kind of fell into this habit of wanting to boil the ocean. Every time there was a problem, we wanted to solve it. We had to be here, we had to be there. And what I saw was people starting to burn out and people starting to like really get frustrated. And so some things that we talked about internally, one was not cautious optimism. It was something optimistic something. But anyway, the sort of framing around that I had with my team was, if we look at everything and say, like, we want to do all this stuff, and like, let's say, it's a huge backlog of things, that's great. But then the problem is that we try to get into it. We have all these roadblocks. We have these things that slow us down. And then what happens is we get really disillusioned because, like, shoot, nothing's moving. But if we actually look at things in a long-term way and say, what are the actual priorities? What are the goals we're going towards? And then what are the steps we need to get there? Then each of those smaller steps become much more impactful. And so it's like, oh, we actually are making progress to our bigger vision, as opposed to trying to chase ambulances to see wherever we can fit in. And so that's been a really big thing. And so one of those really hard transitions my team has made coming into this year is saying no. And that's been the hardest thing, because we want to say yes to everyone. We are scared to, mess up a relationship, or if people to come to us and we say no, they won't come back. And what do we do? And I'm like, that's life. If they want to work with us, they'll come back, and if not, that's okay. But ultimately, the thing we're trying to really say is we have these core OKRs. Like, we actually got really clear on what is our process, what are our goals, what are we hoping to accomplish. Let's get them very crisp. And if things don't fall within those goals that we have, it's a no. And the thing is, that's also scary, is that we're telling VPs and such no. And they're like, well, how do you build trust when you're telling people no? Well, sometimes it's not right now, but other times it's like, hey, we have these priorities. And so if you want us to engage, then we need to figure out what's the trade-off here. And a lot of the building trust is like having real conversations with folks and not just telling them what they want to hear, which has been a huge frustration sometimes. Is like, how do we appease a leader or a group of people, as opposed to, how do we learn with them? How do we grow with them? How do we develop? How do we show that we're willing to engage? And if we don't have the capacity, how can we just tell them, no, we don't know, we don't have the capacity? And in doing so, at least they feel good knowing, oh, at least you're honest with me, as opposed to you saying yes and then my email is in your inbox for 2 weeks, right? Like, a lot of the trust we built really boiled down to process and our ability to prioritize, say yes and no, and to really, again, focus on those priorities of the leaders, understanding the culture, like all those things fit into it. But the biggest thing for us was really like getting our capacity under control so that we aren't burning ourselves out trying to run around doing everything.
So I think for us, it's been important to think about the fact that, like, your culture is kind of what everyone in the company ends up doing every day, right? It's like how you spend your time. Everybody has like company values and things like that. But if you think about how everyone spends their time and what they have to do to build a product, most companies have a process, for how a product needs to go from requirements to those requirements being reviewed to being signed off for legal reasons, policy, privacy even. And because I own privacy already, I was very familiar with this process. And so one of the things that we did in the beginning was insert product equity into the review process for our products. The other thing we did after, and by the way, that wasn't just like a quick yes, done. Like, we got to pilot with a few product teams and leaders who were like, yeah, we'll be your guinea pig for this while you sort of refine and iterate. Others were like, we don't know if or when that we want to do that, but we'll see, right? So we had to sort of prove out the value of that over time, and that we weren't going to impact the speed of business, right? And sort of delivering trust. But because of what I knew from how we effectively and efficiently did this on privacy, and I was starting with zero on product equity, I knew how to do this in a way that would not slow things down, but still help everyone think about it a bit more. The other thing we did is build out what we called Product Equity 101, a workshop about how you build products that work for everyone. We took people in different parts of the business, created some content that first we delivered live, iterated on it, then we turned it into an e-learning, but that has some videos as well with folks that people know that are influential product leaders from different parts of the business, to exemplify that, hey, it isn't just the product equity team doing this stuff. We didn't intend on it, but it turned out that we built that so well. Our onboarding team asked if they could make this training a requirement for all tech team onboarding at Uber. So now it is. So these are some of the things that we did because we know we can't be in every room as the product equity team. We can't look at every product ourselves, but we scaled the work by building out things that everyone encounters in their day-to-day responsibilities. And we continue to iterate. If we get feedback or complaints that like, hey, something doesn't quite make sense in this product requirements document that has to do with product equity or in your review process, and we'll take a look at it, we'll have a conversation, we'll make it better.
Can I say really quickly, I just want to say this is like validating because like literally my team is on a lot of these journeys right now with the trainings and the, like we're in the onboarding for one thing. So just say like validation, this thing works.
Yeah, I was just going to say, plus what was nice about at Visa, we were redefining our product life cycle. And so that's when I felt like, oh yeah, I'm going to be on that team and I'm going to be in there. Let's start adding in things in different parts of concept. What does it mean to build, plan? How do you think of equity throughout the process? So we also did something similar to that. We also went on road shows. Like I asked to go to different meetings and present like what this looks like and give examples outside and inside. So that was the whole thing. I think the trust was people saw it. Again, we're B2B, B2C from an outside view. They could see it. They understood it. They were like, why is it important for us again, D? So I had to like really pick up some examples of where we could have done better or we need to be considering a little different and bring those in. And so it was like, what does equity look like in financial services and how does that translate? And then of course, you know, what's nice about this for speed for us is we have regulators. We're regulated. We're in a regulated area. So that in itself was my like really going, oh, we gotta do this. And so that is also how we build trust and working with our risk management team and things of that nature.
What I'm hearing is creating a standard of understanding, of shared understanding through trainings that people are required to do, through road trips, and getting people to really understand how product equity involves their work. What does the minimum viable product for inclusion look like? And how do you set goals around product equity? What does enough look like? And Dr. D, I know you had a point about the minimum lovable product.
Yeah. So I've asked everyone to think about what is the minimum lovable product, right? Because I thought minimum viable MVP, you are always making trade-offs and you're not really considering the impact of those trade-offs. But when you think of lovable, you know, you can think about it from a journey. So I always tell people product equity is a journey. It's not a sprint. So we're always building blocks. And so sometimes we'll say, hey, for this product, we're going to focus on this particular group. And this is what we're going to do. And this is what enough looks like for this group. But when we go around, because we're in an iterative process, we're agile, we can come back and keep building and adding on for the inclusive perspective. So we're really crisp about that. But I really push people. And one thing, if you take anything out of here, it's really focusing on thinking about what is the minimum lovable product, what's going to be loved by the audience that you're building this product for.
So I think the first thing I'd say that I haven't had a chance to comment on yet is product equity is a business imperative. So I say that because of a lesson we learned when we tried to take Uber to Southeast Asia several years ago. We took the same product that you all know in the US there, and we just dropped it in and said, like, it should work. But it turns out payments and how people pay in different parts of the world is very different. Actually, I believe it is the case that more of our user base pays in cash around the world than a credit card, which we might be used to in this country. So that was one thing. The other thing is that, we're in Texas. People have big cars here, right? Not just four-wheel cars, but sedans, but they have giant vehicles, right? In Southeast Asia, you got a lot of two-wheel vehicles. We didn't account, for that, and we actually lost and sold out of the market, right? And again, like I said, if you don't build for different kinds of people and think about how their culture operates and moves, you lose. So I wanted to add that as well as something for you all to think about if you're thinking about building and designing these teams and the talking points and how you want to position them for resourcing. I already talked about some of what's been important for us in terms of the product equity review program, the training and workshops, the buy-in top down. The other thing that you all know well from great products that are launched, what did Steve Jobs always do, and what did he make famous? That showcase he would have, right? The sort of Apple launches that they were very famous from him when he's wearing all black. So I felt that we needed a platform for product equity in our company as well that's like that. So we can showcase to our company as well as to our users and the whole world how important and how serious we take this subject. So we call it Inclusion Day. And we've had our CEO kick off this event, right? We showcase product launches from across the team. We talk to our users. We usually have a theme for these events. So a part of the day will be bringing in riders and drivers from different, demographics. So I think in this last one, we focused on the Black experience, the LGBTQ plus experience, and the woman's experience in Brazil. And we brought in nonprofits, NGOs to talk to us about their experience with our products and transportation in general. And that's kind of on a main stage type environment. But we also want an environment for our users to be super open and where they outnumber us. So we're intentional about that. So it'll be 5 or 6 drivers in a room with, say, 1 or 2 Uber employees, and we're outnumbered and we really just got to listen. And I ask people, be quiet, take notes, and really understand. And so from that, we come out with a set of opportunities, requirements, pain points, and then we take back to the business a very, beautiful and succinct write-up around the things we need to invest in based on what we learn. And they're not all things for the product equity team to take on. They're often things that other teams need to do because we don't have the expertise in that domain. And then, of course, we have someone on our team drive and make sure those things are getting done with an executive sponsor. So these are some of the things that, that we've done sort of holistically to sort of transform how we build and how we think about who we're building for and really showcase that it's important.
I love the way you said at the end, it's not for us to always do it, and I found that out a lot in Visa, where we look at pricing is really a bottleneck. So I can build an equitable product, but if I can't get it to the people that actually need it. So you have to start thinking of your business design, what's your business model, and things of that nature. And so we actually had to add an inclusive lens to that process in itself. But it wasn't me; it was finance that needed to do that, things of that nature. So
I wanted to add. You made me think of something else. Sometimes it's the carrot, sometimes it's the stick, right? And we bring the stick a lot, but this stage that I was talking about is a carrot. So people are then motivated in the company to deliver something more inclusive or equitable, at all different teams, because we'll get to eventually decide, oh yeah, you get to be on this stage, right, that we're going to broadcast. And what does that do for their careers, right? It's huge. And so we've really thought about this in a sort of a holistic, way at Uber. We got a lot more we need to do. We got a lot of challenges, but this is the foundation that we're building upon.
I love what you said, by the way, around the anecdote around Southeast Asia, specifically because one of the biggest challenges I've seen across multiple companies is people don't understand the difference between localization and culturalization.
Oh my, yes.
And I think that, to your point, like, it is a business imperative, because a lot of times when companies look at expanding into new markets, they think about localization, which is, I'm going to make sure the text is translated into this language, but is the experience actually adequate for this culture, for this group of people, for their needs? I wrote very publicly about this when I worked at Zillow, where we had Zillow offers, and they were, buying homes from people across the country and reselling because they were getting to the iBuyer space. And one of the big things I wrote about was the lack of understanding that buying and selling a home in Charleston, South Carolina is very different than Colorado, which is very different than anywhere in California. And it's because, and especially I think Texas is probably another good example of this, it's a realtor, and that real estate industry is around relationships, not about expediency. It's like, I know this person, or this person's my cousin, or whatever. And a lot of that business failed because they failed to understand that the cultures in these different markets they were in were very different, and thus you had to approach the iBuying space very different for each of these spaces. And so the power of product equity, and by extension, this is where, like, my belief of, like, technically product equity shouldn't exist. It should just be good product development. Like, it should just be how we do things.
That's the goal.
The problem is, you get the MBAs and the computer sciences and the such in the room who are making the decisions, who've not really think about humans, but think about their own core context, and then from there,
I feel
they're making
offended.
decisions.
I'm an engineer.
Yeah, but you're different because you had 17,000 different roles. She's been an engineer, a designer, a PM, a privacy person, a legal person. She used to be a judge once. No, but I think there's some challenges around that. But to the original question, which was...
What does
yes,
where we have
MVP.
the Bible?
Thank you, love. So I'll answer the question of what does done look like. It doesn't exist, but there are milestones. And I think a lot of times when we talk about these topics of equity or inclusion or accessibility, you get leaders who are like, well, what does done look like? And then your response is, it doesn't. And they're like, well, what the fuck does that mean? Because we only have so much capacity. And reality is like, well, what are the key milestones we are aiming for that can give us an indication of if we are being successful, if we are seeing the things we want to see, or if we're not seeing those things, right? Another piece of that is the challenge with telling the narrative of product equity is that unless you have regulators, you are moving at the speed of the business, and how do I say this?
You make me think of something, or the question in itself. Like, I know earlier I talked about minimum lovable product, but when I think of a framework that I've been using in, like, moving this through or getting through obstacles in designing the product with all people at the table, is commercial viability and social impact. And those are the two areas I look at. Okay, can we do this commercially? Like, and what's the money? How's it going to hit? But then also add that social impact. And that came from working with, at Visa, we have an inclusive impact team. And that's what I'm talking about. Like, we're really trying to just make it a part of our business so we can get it there. That it is what we think about all the time. But we use that framework to try to, like, define what's that most lovable product look like.
Yeah. We are still newer, right? So again, my team had formed when I was hired almost 2 years ago. And so we're newer in a lot of ways. And so MVP still exists. And the conversations I'm having right now aren't like what's minimal lovable, because I know ears aren't turned on to that yet. What I'm talking about right now is, if you say you're going to do this and you put it, and then you say it's a priority, but then you put it in the backlog, when will you actually get to it? Because if we put it in the backlog, we're never going to get to it. And so the conversation I have is around efficiency and around, like, what do we actually have the capacity to do? I know the accessibility team pulled this stat, and I've used it quite a bit, where it's like, if you build in accessibility from the beginning, then you save so much money on resources, rework. Like, it's it's a lot of effort that gets saved when you do it as a part of the process. And I think the challenge that I've found is getting people to understand that we're helping save them time.
Yeah.
And I found that in fact, I would say Firefly is a great example. And I would say this out loud to anyone who cares and who will hear. Firefly would not exist in the space it is today without our team. And I will own that, and I will challenge anyone who says anything otherwise. And I say that mainly because we had to figure out how to move quickly with them. We had to help point out things with them. We had to create decks. We had to do the things to make sure that there was a level of understanding and that helped build trust, that helped us become a key part of the process. So now I know that I have someone in my team who's 100% dedicated to reducing harm and bias and increasing culturalization within Firefly. I'm trying to expand that. Outside help helps. But I'm trying to expand those people. But in doing so, it's, hey, we are now a part of your process. So when you want to evaluate the model, my team is a part of that process. When you want to talk about how we do pre and post processing stuff, or how we do data acquisition, things like that, my team is now a part of that process. And it's because, one, we had to build trust, two, we had to point out the gaps, and then three, we had to then prove that we can move quickly while still not being a bottleneck. All the things, all the challenges. But a lot of it just really boiled down to we're not at MVP yet. We're at, what is the risk to the business? What is the risk to the brand? What are the risks? Yeah. And then can we mitigate some of those risks early on? And in doing so, we prevent something worse from happening, or we prevent us needing to do a lot of rework or having to pay bills or whatever. I think there's a couple of companies right now in the AI space who have had to pay tens of millions of dollars in mistakes. Yeah. And it's because of the lack of people being able to say, we're going to be infused in this process. So that was a whole rambling thing, but I think y'all went with me. I saw a nod, so it's great.
I think you definitely touched on risks being really important. Yeah. And there's various types of risks, yeah. Right? So it's, you are the reputation risk. I know, as a brand, Visa, we're looking at that. That's on automatic. Financial risk, operational risk. We are looking in, and we work with the risk team to go through that. So I think that's really important that companies look at it from a risk perspective, but don't get stuck there, right? Yeah.
Well, I think that answered the question that I was going to go to next, which is, what is the cost of building an inequitable product? We also started to touch on a conversation about regulation and how do you ensure, financial services being a regulated industry, or accessibility having regulations around it. How do you use these structures externally to push for process points internally, and how do you expand that? I know, Zach, you have a lot of experience there.
So I went through GDPR with privacy in the EU, and I'm definitely excited for the EU's Accessibility Act that's coming in 2025. We'll see how much they enforce, right away. But it's those moments and the emergence of new policy and regulation like that can drive sea change. So it's public, private, your users, everybody can have a voice in sort of what's the right thing. I think you were just sort of alluding to Gemini and what's going on there, for Google, which is a company I used to work at and love. And I know they're trying to do the right thing. And it's great that they, I think said, we need to pause, from the top down. They didn't have to do that, right? Necessarily, especially as quickly, as they did. They could have said, we're going to pivot. Right, which is something else, and even appreciated. We saw Sergey come out and say, the same thing that Sundar said. But I think that shows when you talk about the cost of, not getting it right, or seeing how it is a core part of the product that sometimes is not easy to see or accept. Especially if, realistically, we've been talking about it, and I think you've been alluding to it, but if you've, gone to, MIT or Caltech, and you're this brilliant, engineer, and you built things amazingly for 10, 12 years, and then comes a moment all of a sudden where a topic you don't know that much about, right? Inclusion, product equity is all of a sudden essential to your product's success, and people are telling you that along the way. It can be possible that you don't see why, or you don't understand until you actually have an impact. And I'm not saying at all that's what happened in Google's case, but this can happen, right? Where you have all the right people there in the room and they're saying the right thing, but it isn't quite heard. I've seen it happen, in my context. I've been there where that voice is not wanting to be received. And it can be frustrating for my team, but I've been around long enough to know. And actually, I actually heard this first from one of Uber's early CISOs. He told me, and this is when I'm really focused on privacy. He's like, Zach, I know you can't get the influence you want right now. I know you have the right thing in mind. I'm with you, but trust me, something will go wrong, and then they're going to need you, and they're going to need to hear you, and then you won't have this challenge again. And he's like, I don't, want it to happen that way, but it's correct, right? There are lessons that come from getting it wrong.
I'm gonna let you know right now, I'm real petty. I'm corporate petty. Corporate petty. I love I Told You So. I love it. It's the best. I look forward to them.
Do you say it?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
I like this.
As a
I
highly
don't say
paid
it.
individual at this company, absolutely. At every company, because I think that I feel like we get really stuck in the niceties of corporate interactions. And I tell you all the time, I'm not nice, I'm kind. And kind is I'm gonna tell you the truth. And sometimes that truth is gonna be a little petty. And that's because that's my own little self-vindication, because I had to deal with your BS while I was sitting here telling you, hey, you need to watch out. But actually, I wanted to go back to something. So you were saying two things. One was around the cost. I think one really challenging thing about cost is time horizon. Because again, a lot of this work takes time to see the fruition of it. But most organizations are scheduling 6 months, maybe 3 months, like on a quarterly, half-year basis. I think the hard work is having to keep that narrative going so that the corporate amnesia doesn't set in. Because you'll do a thing and it'll have impact a year later, sometimes maybe even 2 years later. And then you have to then retell the story, and that's a lot of work. And so I think that you mentioned road shows, you mentioned having to do some work with like storytelling as well. It's like literally the sucky, but also the most important part of this work is having to keep hitting those narratives constantly, because the amnesia is real. And just because you did something in January does not mean you're going to get the benefit of it in December. And so like I would say like what can go wrong, what's the cost? Sometimes not telling your story and like telling the narrative and keep hitting on it, the cost is it's forgotten, and that means your impact is forgotten. So that further impact to the human, to the person who's going to have to navigate whatever this thing is even more multiplied.
We are approaching the end. I'd love to open up the queue for questions. I see one.
Dr. Siraju Jalauso, he, they pronouns, medium build, relatively short, blue hat, black hoodie, goals, dreams, and melanin, sky blue pants. Nice to see you all, Doctor. A pleasure. I work with the U.S. Digital Service at the White House. You always gotta acknowledge a doctor when you're in the same room. It's always important. There's only 3% of them. You gotta pay attention. So I work at the U.S. Digital Service at the White House, and we work with product engineering design on a regular basis. The thing is, our employees are temporary, at a lack of better words. They're usually there for 2 to 4 years. So the idea of product equity is kind of lost because people are just trying to do whatever they can within the space they're there and then go. So do you have any insight or suggestions as to how to keep product equity at the forefront despite the fact that people keep rolling in and out of a job? Thank you.
It's a good question.
Yeah, I would say, is there something that, if it's something you're motivated to do, is there something you can take on that's a very short time horizon? Because you said they got 2 years, 4 years. Can you do something in a month or in 2 months yourself and with a couple of others who really care to demonstrate impact and show that, right? Because if you're in one of your reviews, I don't know how you guys sort of assess performance, come before leadership to showcase, your work, and like, you bring something there and it drove some impact and it was about product equity, and the leadership is like, oh, this is awesome, this is great, right? Like you'll have the heads turning and people like wanting to get on that train. So I really think it starts with demonstrating impact. But what I described does mean you're putting yourself out on a limb a little bit and spending a little time on something that may not work the first time, may not work the second time, but eventually it will work. That's what I would suggest.
I agree with that. Small wins help. Like, because again, the assumption is a lot of this work takes a long time, which it does. A lot of it takes a long time sometimes to like really land the impact you want, but there's still short-term things you can do to have impact. And so like piggyback on what Zach said, like small wins are gold because you can show snippets of things and hopefully win trust to do bigger things.
And just having examples, like finding current examples, like that it motivates others to do it as well. So that would be my addition to what they both said.
Hello. My name is Michelle Kiefer. I'm wearing white top, blue pants, red boots, Caucasian, living in Texas my whole life, and a hat that I built out with a lot of little trinkets that I found at a hat bar. My question, we touched on around this a lot. We talked about the trainings that were happening, the road shows that were happening, the need for the constant narrative that's happening. Well, there's also this huge emergence on the internal marketing and internal culture building and community building side. So how does internal marketers become best friends with the DEI and product equity teams to support that and build those internal narratives so there's a constant stream of conversations happening?
So I do work with the internal comms team, and so we've done a couple of, they've helped me develop case studies that we've put on our intranet. So that is how we've been working with the internal comms. We also have a moment of spotlight during like our all staff meetings sometimes, depending on if we have that. But mostly it's been taking these case studies have been so great, and how we've had an impact with clients and having that sent out so people can see. Also, when we have hackathons, like we just had a hackathon in January, and it was so great to see how many came up with ideas around equity, inclusion, bias. And it was an AI hackathon. I was like, oh, I have an impact. So so that's how I've been working with them. I don't know.
I would say when I formed the team, I knew that internal and external marketing was going to be important. External because it holds the company accountable and holds my team accountable, and then internal because awareness, right? So like I'm standing here today sitting because of our internal marketing. So I'll say I have someone on my team that is focused on comms and working on newsletters, and we just got our intranet website put up, and we have our wiki page and things. On top of that, we have our comms within the whole org, which we're working with, and we're leveraging them to help us do more road shows and say, hey, can we present something in this, president of this organization's what we call them all team meetings now. That was one of the things I changed. If you wonder why all hands is ableist, we can talk about it later.
That's why I said all staff. Yeah.
It's all team, all staff. Anyway, so, I'll say all this to say, like, we have been leveraging because, again, the messaging is important and getting people to understand, like, who we are and what we do, and, like, getting to at least be able to point to one thing and say, oh, yeah, the product equity team has worked on that, or that's something they do, has been super important and has actually opened a lot of doors for everything from global onboarding to us working with corporate strategy on different ways in which you can approach, like, product innovation to a bunch of other areas. But I would say, like, without our comms folks, like, I don't think we'd be as successful as we have been.
Yeah, what I'd add is that in working with comms for a long time, at least at our company, they have their own strategy top down for what narratives they need to hit for the company in a particular year. And so what's been important for our product equity team is to read the comms team into our roadmap early and like what we're planning. And so they can, tell us what sort of aligns with what their key messages are going to be in a half or in a year and things that they want to do. And some will align and some won't. And some of the things we really want won't. And I have to tell my team, like, hey, do the work. It's not worth, fighting like that kind of a battle. Like other teams have their own job and their own, expertise. And so, but yeah, having those conversations early with the comms team is what has been important for us. And then that cross-pollination with those most impactful leaders, like I said. In one particular example, I had an opportunity to announce that workshop or training I was talking about to the whole company. And we have a particular product leader who is on stage more than anyone else. So I was like, hey, I want you to announce this. So then when I went to our like social media team and things like that, they were like, oh, this guy's involved? We want to do it. There was no questions, right? So it's understanding like how people move and how they make decisions as well that can kind of cut through some of even the strategies that people might have.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think it's a sign of a great conversation when we have questions left over. I'm sure you can find our panelists afterwards. Thank you so much for having us here. Before we leave, I just want to recognize that I'm on stage with 3 Black director level folks at tech companies. Part of the work that we do at the Tech Accountability Coalition is collect that data, and we have about 3.2 million pieces of intersectional employee data. Well, not PII, accurate, anonymous, but we are going through a process of understanding what that looks like. And I just really want to commend both the why y'all have brought to the stage at the beginning of this conversation is making sure that folks don't experience things that you have had to go through, and creating products, and as a result, creating a world of experience that is enjoyable, that feels like a home to everybody, and how you bring that to your work, your teams, and the products you create. So can I get a huge round of applause for our panelists today? Thank you so much.